Thank you, choir. We appreciate the effort that you put in. It sounds wonderful every morning. Thank you. It's not a surprise. I'm sometimes asked why I stopped practicing law. And the positive part of the answer is that since I was a teen, I wanted to be a minister, but I didn't have a religion. So I had to wait until I found the wonderful God-soaked denomination of the United Church of Christ to be able to follow that calling. The negative part of the answer is the law profession did not set well with me. Too often I found too little justice in the justice system. More than I care to remember, justice was delayed, avoided, ignored, bought, or otherwise thwarted. You don't have to be a lawyer to see this still going on, like rich folks being treated with favor that the poor and the middle class never get, like politicians appointing judges and justices who bend the law to the breaking point for them, like blacks, other people of color, and immigrants being treated far different than white people, like people who abuse children not being prosecuted and having their names protected by the system, like residents and citizens being snatched and sent to foreign prisons without due process. Justice gets thwarted far too often in the justice system. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of good judges, lawyers, and officers of the law. There really are. And thankfully, a number of them have been in the news lately, holding the line on some of the unjust and unconstitutional conduct going on right now. But sadly, some judges, lawyers, and officers of the law act in unethical, unconstitutional, and unjust ways. There are some in the justice system who don't seem very interested in justice. What they seem most interested in is their side winning by any means they can get away with. Truth and justice fall prey to personal interests and agendas. I've been before many good judges, but sadly there are not so good judges like the one in today's story that EJ read so nicely. Court rules and laws get broken, ignored, or seemingly made up along the way. And it made me very sad and frustrated to have litigation treated like a game where rules could be discarded at the whim of the refs or the players. And so it was not as difficult for me to leave the law as it might seem once I found the God of love in the United Church of Christ and the old call to be a minister returned. But since God has a marvelous sense of humor, as a pastor, I believe I have been a part of helping justice along much more as a pastor than when I was a lawyer. Augustine defined justice as that virtue which gives everyone their due. And that's how I understand justice, as a virtue that gives everyone their due. And I'm not alone in agreeing with what Augustine, the Westminster Dictionary of Theological Terms, defines justice as the concept of each person receiving what is due. And that dictionary goes on to make this very interesting and important point on justice. It says, quote, biblically, the emphasis is on right relationships and persons receiving a share of the resources of society. Concern is expressed for the oppressed and their right treatment. Justice is related to love and grace, end quote. In seminary, we learned from our ethics professor, Dr. Oglesby, that love is justice distributed. We cannot talk about love without talking about justice, since justice is how love is embodied. Now, my legal dictionary, at first glance, seems to have a little bit different definition of justice than me and Augustine and the theology dictionary and my ethics professor and the Bible. That dictionary says that justice is the proper administration of laws. But if you read a little further, it goes on to read and say that it is the disposition of legal matters or disputes to render everyone their due. And so justice, at its heart is meant to ensure fair distribution of what people are entitled to get people their due. The Bible is not law in this country, but Torah was supposed to be the law when Jesus first told today's story about the widow and the unjust judge. Torah is the name of the first 5 books of the Bible, and Torah, the law, requires that judges and everyone else respect God. Moreover, righteous judgment on the part of a judge is mandated by Torah, and injustices are considered the opposite of respect for God. Biblically speaking, judges were supposed to respect not just God, but other people, and they were to listen to the one wronged and not ignore the supplication of the fatherless, nor the widow when she pours out her story. And so it's crystal clear that the judge in Jesus' parable is the opposite of what a judge is supposed to be. He doesn't follow biblical laws. He's disrespectful, not doing his job, not caring about God or people or justice. People do not get what's due from this judge. And listeners of Jesus' story, when it was first told, would have heard that the judge was unjust and not doing what he was supposed to do under biblical law. And no doubt early listeners would have likened him to the ruthless Roman system of government for which he was a stooge, a comparison Jesus very likely had in mind when he told the story. One commentator on this verse puts it like this: the parable of the unjust judge reflects a world of bribes and brutality, a world of injustice for the poor, or at least justice delayed or gained only by force, which is injustice too. Jesus is a very good storyteller. An unjust judge is a caricature of bad judges and a metaphor for the unjust justice system. And the way Jesus tells it, the judge is one of those characters you love to hate. The unjust judge is a foil to the poor widow who finds a way to win in a system that's predisposed against her and virtually everyone else who would have first heard Jesus' parables. She may be a nobody to the culture and the powers that be, but she's wily, and she's so persistent that the unjust judge gives up and gives her justice, not because he wants to do right, but because she has worn him down. In other words, the judge has to do what is right, so she'll go away. He says to himself, though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming. To put it in the vernacular, the widow wins by driving the judge nuts. Jesus is a good storyteller, and he has a sense of humor. This is supposed to be funny stuff. A cultural nobody, lowest of the low, female widow, bests a big, powerful, bad judge. That Roman stooge is afraid of her. And the result is that justice is dispensed. The widow gets her due. And one way to hear this parable is obvious, that if a ruthless, unjust judge will respond to persistent petitions, surely our good and our loving God will. In fact, Luke notes that Jesus says as much at verses 6 to 8, and the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says and will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night. Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. It's easy to hear this as Jesus claiming that with enough persistence we can get everything we want in prayer, and people do often hear it that way, and it's preached like that too. But that's not all Luke reports that Jesus taught. The story at its heart is about God getting us justice. Justice where each person receives what is due. As we just heard, verse 7 and 8 report, Jesus said, and will not God grant justice to his chosen one who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And listen again to the theological dictionary note on justice. Biblically, the emphasis is on right relationships and persons receiving a share of the resources of society. Concern is expressed for the oppressed and their right treatment. Justice is related to love and grace. You see, we can choose to hear the parable as more than being just about one outcast of one culture pestering one judge until he breaks down and metes out justice to one person. We can choose to hear the widow as the never-ending voice of God throughout time being raised in God's people, demanding justice from corrupt earthly powers. We can hear it as God's power working in history, even in the culture's lowest of the low, in the every woman and every man. And we saw this yesterday with people taking to the street to oppose injustices that come with kings and dictators. And I very much appreciate that in Portland, some of the everyday folks started dressing up as inflatable creatures, giving voice to their calls for justice through humor, while also symbolizing creation crying out the Creator's call for justice. Not even those who wield earthly powers without regard to God or people or justice can stop God's never-ending call for the granting of justice. What is due? And when it comes down to it, the powers that be in the world have rarely wanted to do what is just, to give all their due. But the heartbeat of God, thump, thump, thumping for justice, and the voices of God's agents has a great track record of wearing them down. And sometimes it can seem like it doesn't work, but we can hear the parable today as telling us that it takes time and persistence, but what is due will come. No petty, power-mongering, people-loathing judge or other power elite can stop it. And there's great hope in this. And it's not just hypothetical. We can see in history it's true. Little voices of cultural nobodies have spoken God's truth to the powerful relentlessly. And the powerful have tried to ignore them, have evaded justice, but have in the end over and over and over again eventually caved in and said, I will grant justice so they may not wear me out. And if we think about it, pestering the powerful has led to God's justice being granted with respect to so many things that humanity has moved closer and closer to a world with more justice. Slavery is no longer lawful. Women are no longer property. Literacy is no longer just for elites. Wealth is a little bit more distributed. And the welfare of the masses matter to most of us, as does equality. And yes, as of late, we have as a nation taken steps backward, horrible steps backward, as racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, and otherism, they've never gone away. And they seem to be raising their ugly heads here, and our legal system's not yet a place for justice for all. We need to live into the claim in our nation's founding document that all are created equal and endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. They can't be taken away. We're not where we need to be by a long shot, but we are a heck of a lot closer than we were when Jesus first told the parable that we heard this morning. Our founding document of this nation, laying claim to equality and rights, is one of the steps in the right direction for liberty and justice for all. Our right to assemble and protest for justice is another. And the more everyday women and everyday men stand up and voice God's call for justice, the more justice there will be, and the quicker it will come about. The people of God have ceaselessly pestered the worldly powers for justice for 2,000 years. And when they have done so, when we do so, we are God's voice that is ultimately victorious. In widows, God speaks. In slaves, God speaks. In women, God speaks. In the poor, God speaks. In refugees, God speaks. In people of color, God speaks. In religious minorities, God speaks. In the other able, God speaks. In LGBTQ plus, God speaks. Even in us, God speaks. And I have to add that even us dressed as inflatable creatures, God speaks. And in all those through whom God speaks, through their voices, in the long run, God succeeds. Worldly powers have long held too little respect for humans and too little respect for God and too little respect for justice and what is due. And what is due is the well-being of all. But Like the poor widow in today's lesson, God doesn't give up. Through tenacity and persistence of the voice of God's children, history proves that justice will out. Justice will be provided. What God wants due to all will be given. No bad behaving government officials can stop that in the long run. That's the point of Jesus' parable. And that, my dear brothers and sisters, is good news. Amen.